Let's talk to Benji, he, him from Alabama. It sounds like you want to talk about God loves humans more than angels, and also talking about free will. Does that sum up your call today?
Yeah, there was other stuff I was going to try to talk about too, but
all right. Well, let's go to the first. What's the biggest thing you want to talk about first? I mean, we can probably get to, depending on time, maybe get to a few different topics today. But give us your best one.
Well, I guess the God loving humans more than angels. At least y'all can hear me this time. I called in last week and nobody could hear me. So, let's see. So I brought it up to my church earlier today. I go to church, but I'm not. I'm an agnostic. So I mean, I'm really old school when it comes to Christianity, and the church I go to is very how to put this? I'm not even sure how to describe it, honestly. They're very strict, I guess. I'm not really sure how to word it. But I asked the preacher point blank, I said, why does God love humans more than angels? And also, if you're an angel and you're in heaven, because he was trying to tell me there's no free will in heaven. I'm like, well, that wouldn't make any sense. I mean, at that point, God's just a dictator all over the place. Also, if there's no free will in heaven, then how did Lucifer and 3/4 of the angels in heaven rebel? You know, also it would kind of suck. Like if you're in heaven, you know, and you're stuck there and you have no free will. I mean, that I'd rather be on earth than heaven at that point. Yeah, I was going to get y'all's opinion on it.
So what did they say when you asked that question? What was their response?
Well, it's funny. He was like, he was shocked. And then he said, I'm going to postpone that and get back to you on it later, is basically what he said. And everyone else, because I was in this Bible study class thing with like 10 other people. And I brought that up to the preacher guy who was teaching the class at the time earlier today. And nobody even wanted to look at me after that, because he was asking me stuff, like asking the people stuff. He said, like, what are some of the commandments that, you know, God wanted to keep? And I brought up kind of the stupid ones. I was like, well, you can't have mixed fabrics, and, you know, you can't pick up sticks on the Sabbath. And then he brought up one that kind of, you know, brings the point home. The preacher did. He's like, oh, yeah, and if you have an unruly kid, you can stone them to death. But he said it like a joke. But, that's actually one of the laws.
He's been thinking about it.
But he was trying to brush it off, and then everyone else was surprised because I wasn't reading from a book or nothing. I just know them off the top of my head. So
yeah, Benji, I have a question kind of about all of this. So your initial statement was asking about why God loves humans more than angels. And I want to pose the question, do you believe that God does love humans?
Well, it's complicated because throughout the Bible, God plagued humans, destroyed, murdered, killed, all kinds of stuff. And, you know, I honestly don't know how to answer that, to be honest with you. Because religion says, yeah, he's love and this and that and the other, but then you get the change in definitions and crap, but that's just stupid. But if God actually did love humans, if he was all powerful, we wouldn't have the problems that we have. You also get into the whole thing of, well, God allows the devil to do it. I mean, any bad thing that happens, they don't blame God. They blame Lucifer, which is just stupid to me. I mean, Lucifer was the highest angel, but God was over him. You know, and if Lucifer would have took God's place, that'd be different. Then you could blame Lucifer because he would be God, essentially. But because God, you know, they don't look at God as, oh, he makes mistakes and all this. I mean, even God even said it himself in the Bible. He says that he regrets making humans. He felt bad about it and flooded the whole damn earth. Which, if you believe that story, but then you look at the evidence and there's no evidence for a global flood. And then scholars have basically said that it was more like a localized flood. But anyway.
Well, and with that too, you have the issue that if God, so God knew what was going to happen, created humans, knowing that he was going to regret it and then exterminate them, except for one family, and like continued to let the same humanity do humanity again. Like they never stopped doing the things that he wiped out most of them for in the first place.
Right.
So like his extermination attempts didn't even work.
Yeah.
So what was the intent in all that is my question. Like, did you want to get rid of them or did you not want to get rid of them? And did you really regret it?
Well, usually the church avoids that. My other thing that I looked at, because my church has this little diagram thing, it's like on the wall, and it has a timeline of all like the biblical people. And according to it, Enoch and Moses and I think Arab and a few others lived hundreds and hundreds of years. But then it has the little line that shows when the flood happened. Enoch lived after the flood for a while, a good bit after the flood. But then I asked the ones that I was with, I said, well, why, if these people live hundreds and hundreds of years, why is it that people are only living, 70, 80 years now, or, maybe 120 or something like that? And people before then lived hundreds of years. And then their answer is, oh, well, the flood happened and it doesn't happen anymore. But yet that doesn't make sense because Enoch and Moses lived past the flood. Well, no, I know Moses did. I don't know if Enoch did. But, and then after that, it gets shorter and shorter. So it's the lifespan and it got smaller and then smaller and then smaller. But that's not how evolution works. If we was living hundreds of years before the flood, we would still be living hundreds of years now. So, I didn't tell them that, but that's how it would work.
Yeah. So Benji, we're talking a lot about things that I think we agree on.
Yeah.
But I think maybe we want to address some of the things we don't agree on as much. So you are. Well, when you called in, you said that you're a theist, and you kind of mentioned being agnostic on all that. What's keeping you identifying as a theist? Like, can we get into the meat on some of that?
Well, the only reason, so I identify as a theist because I believe in limbo, which not a lot of Christians still believe in limbo, but I believe in limbo, heaven, hell, God, and Jesus. I don't believe in the Trinity. So that's one thing. A lot of
Why? What is it about the Trinity that you find unbelievable, but you believe in God and Jesus?
Because it's absurd. Plus, it was made up by the woman church. So the idea of the Trinity is that Jesus and God and Holy Spirit's all one, but yet Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus sacrifices himself to himself. I mean, it just doesn't make any damn sense. And I knew. So
you say that about the Trinity, but then, so here's my question. I want to know how you determine what is true and what isn't. So what gives you this information that the Trinity is not true, but that Jesus, God, heaven, hell, and limbo are true? How did you arrive at those conclusions?
Personal experience, knowledge, just being around a long time, doing
what kind of experience?
The Old Testament. Well, I mean, it's like I've died a few times and saw things, but then I know y'all would probably bust that off as chemicals in my brain. The other thing that
you got me there.
Also, I've read the Dead Sea Scrolls and a bunch of other books, Book of Mary, Book of Enoch, Book of Judas, and a bunch of other ones that was thrown out of the Bible. I don't get why they even did that. When the Roman Catholic Church, when the council came together and put the Bible together, which they don't really teach this crap in actual churches, but the Bible is not just one book. It's a collection of books told over decades and decades by word of mouth, playing the game of telephone. none of the people that's in the books actually wrote the books that they have them in. The names were basically put on there by the church. And then the books that the church didn't like, they threw out and burned and declared heresy. If you read the other books that they threw out, the Bible, it's interesting because it adds more layers to it. Like the giants, the Nephilim, the sons of angels, the watchers, the time that Enoch went to heaven and was shown the secrets of the universe. I mean, there's so much crap that they threw out. And then you have people that say, oh, well, the Bible's the word of God. No, it's the word of man because that's who wrote it. So
then how do you know?
It's not inspired.
So then how do you know if we agree the Bible is the word of man, it's not actually the word of God? Why do you still believe in God, and why do you still believe in Jesus when the majority of the information we have about both come from that book that you also agree was written by people, not by the word of God?
Well, because, my reasons are complicated, but I will say that I don't like the human race blaming the problems on Lucifer because it defeats the whole point. In fact, God did more evil than Lucifer did, especially in the Old Testament. But then
So why do you believe in this God, though?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I believe in God and all of that, but I know that people's hate or their knowledge is misplaced. I mean, you can't.
But whether or not you like the God, I want to know how you arrived at that conclusion. Because I know you mentioned experience, you mentioned the Dead Sea Scrolls, so it sounds like there's a combination of what you see as like textual evidence, and the other side being intuition and your experience, which actually goes very well with the cold open from today, where I talked about intuition and how reliable it is. So which of those sides do you think contributes more to your belief system, or is it completely 50-50 in the middle?
60-40.
Okay, so what's the strongest evidence for you?
Well, I've died a few times and seen. I never went to heaven, but I've seen limbo and stuff. I mean, I've seen spirits and all kinds of other crap. So, I mean, I believe because of that, because of personal experience. Also, personal experience is necessarily first person, so I wouldn't be able to prove that to y'all. Plus, you would dismiss it as chemicals in my brain, like I pointed out earlier.
Well, I think there's a difference between dismissing and explaining. I don't think we would dismiss what you have to say. I think we'd be able to explain it in a way that makes a little bit more sense, that involves chemicals firing in your brain and survival methods of your body and things like that. But I wouldn't say dismiss it.
Yeah, but see, I mean, I'm just going off what I already know about the show and how this works with y'all. Even if I was to, and no offense to both of you, but even if I was to explain a lot of stuff, what I know and how I know it and all of that, you would probably just dismiss it as not enough sufficient evidence to warrant belief.
But let me stop you there. If you know that no matter what you say, it's going to be met with the idea that there are scientific and real world explanations for why those things or those thoughts or those feelings or their experiences happened, why instead would that not be the ticket to exploring that option more and potentially discovering that that's actually the reality, and maybe changing your perspective a little bit based on facts and evidence that exist in reality, as opposed to ideas that are more fluid and based on a book that you said yourself was written by men instead of written by God? Because what you're saying is, well, every time I tell you about my experiences, you have an answer for it. And in my opinion, that's a great opportunity to say, wait a second, maybe somebody can help me understand what it is I've experienced, as opposed to chalking it up to religion. Not in a dismissive way, just in a, actually what you think might be God and Jesus can be explained by this very real world experience and this very real world scientifically backed opportunity for learning.
Are you familiar? Let me ask you this, because I do have an answer for that, and it's kind of long, so I'm gonna fast track it. One, there was disagreement between scientists and churches long before, decades and decades ago, centuries ago. And what ended up happening when scientists started discovering, a good example, evolution. Okay, let's just go with that. When scientists, Charles Darwin and everyone else discovered evolution, Charles Darwin tested evolution on turtles and a bunch of other stuff and did research. And he dedicated his life to the study of evolution and Darwinism, basically. And so if you look at that and then you compare that to the churches and even parents and things that get involved in that and say, well, I'm not going to let my kid learn evolution, they go with creationism. And so there's been a conflict between creationism and evolution for decades. And so I could sit here and say, well, yes, science has an answer for things, or at best explains things the best it can based on the evidence. And the scientific model changes constantly as time progresses and people learn new things. But then you have the other side of the coin where, and I've dealt with this in the past, philosophers hundreds of years ago basically said that yes, you have science and you can label whatever anything you want to, and it becomes that based on science. But then if you take that, if it's actually something else that you don't fully understand, science wouldn't be able to fix that, because let's say, for example,
I think
there's a misunderstanding of what science is.
Yeah.
Right. Science isn't a way to just apply a label to something, right? It's a way to evaluate the world around you. Like, it's a method, right? It's not an ideology. It's not like evolution is not just something static that has this one answer and doesn't, change its model over time. And you did mention that, but I think framing science and philosophy and religion as like separate, like opposing viewpoints maybe isn't the most accurate way to go about this. And especially because I think maybe if I change the angle a little bit for science, kind of addressing your near-death experiences, et cetera, I think like the point isn't that science has one specific answer and we can just slap a label onto it. The idea is there are possible alternatives. And do we have sufficient evidence necessarily for, slapping this label on it? And like, let's say if your near-death experience happened, we can't just dismiss it and say it's obviously, brain chemicals. It's obviously a hallucination. We can't necessarily do that. But what we can do is find a probability for alternatives and say, what is the most likely cause or the most likely variable contributing to this? And then we can say, do we have the ability to test which one of these is closer to the correct answer? Like, that's what we need to be doing with this claim. It's not, what I don't want you to do, I don't want you to say, well, philosophy sounds like it has a better answer than science. Like, science is a branch of philosophy, right? Like, all of this stems from the same concepts. All of it stems from the same logic, right?
Right. But what I was getting at, science helps you with models, and it helps you see the different options that you have to explain something. What I'm getting at is that let's say there's 5 different options for what happened to me. I can sit there and say it's a religious option, and it changes nothing because that's subjective. I could sit here and say, well, I
disagree.
Someone else can say it's my brain chemicals.
Benji, I disagree that it doesn't change anything, because people make decisions based on what they believe is the cause of whatever's happening. Like as a physician, I know people who will decline blood transfusions because they believe that there's a spiritual reason why they can't get them, and then they die. There are people who refuse other treatment. There are people who undergo unsafe treatment because their religion wants them to find a religious solution. Like, so having that framework is important and does make a difference. And so, and again, I think you're putting too much weight on putting it into either the religious box or in the science box or the philosophy box. Like, let's strip all the labels away. Let's strip all of those. So no, like, I don't want to see this as debating science versus philosophy here. Let's take an example of an experience that you had. And let's say, let's just think of what alternatives there could be. Like, what could be the cause of that thing? And then let's evaluate what would we need to do in order to demonstrate whether or not that is true. Does that sound like an okay thing we could try?
Yeah, but the only thing I would say, I mean, if we strip all the labels away, does that not just make everything void and meaningless?
No, it just means that we're not limited by the bias of what we think, because I don't want you to say, oh, well, I'm not going with this is too sciencey of an answer. Like, that doesn't matter. All of this is just, is this thing true or not? And what else could this be? It's like if for people who like believe in Bigfoot, like it's the same method you do for that. Like I remember talking to a caller a few years ago about having a Bigfoot like footprint, like just some random animal footprint in like their yard, or like I think they were on a farm or something. And I found this footprint in the mud, and we didn't have to overanalyze what method we were using. We just said, hey, what could this be? Could this have been a bear? Could this have been somebody, like, could it have been actually Bigfoot? Could it have been an artist who went in and like made an imprint, like maybe made a sculpture of a Bigfoot foot and then, like, you know, made the imprint to get pictures? Like, there's so many ways we can think through this, and we don't need to be limited by avoiding or favoring a certain school of thought, if you will. It's just us talking through what could be the reason for this.
Right.
Well, I'm kind of already on the religious boat somewhat, besides me being...
Yeah, and so don't you think that you have a little bit of bias in that? Because you say, I'm in this camp, and that's what I'm trying to avoid. Because once you start using that identity label with this, or trying to fit yourself into a particular group or a particular set of beliefs, you're limiting yourself to thinking through the problem in other ways. Right? So I want to try to eliminate as much bias as possible first. And then if we end up with a spiritual answer, then we end up with a spiritual answer. But I don't think we have enough, just because what I hear you doing is you had you say multiple near-death experiences, and then somehow you're getting from that to religious explanation. And all we want to know is, how did we bridge that gap? Because it takes work. It takes work to rule things out. And I don't know if you've done the work to rule out alternatives.
Well, and not only that, but my question would be, if, say, for example, there was a scientific answer that properly addresses every question that you have, why wouldn't you want that to be one of the answers? Why would you be given an answer where everything you want to know is kind of wrapped up and explained, and still want to say, no, I think it's something else. I think it's religion instead. When it sounds like you're not entirely sold on religion either, other than the belief in God and Jesus, it sounds like you have just as many questions for religious authority.
I don't believe in dogma authority, the old, I don't believe that just because a church says it makes it right. And that's kind of what my church is doing, is that they're twisting the word to fit their own narrative. And I didn't say that to the preacher, obviously. And in fact, let me tell you this too. When I
Well, wait, hold on. Wouldn't you say also, though, that potentially you are also twisting things to fit your own narrative? I mean, Ben, am I wrong? Like, that kind of sounds like what's going on here is there's questions being presented, and when there's true answers available that are also anticipated to be scientific, the response from him is, no, probably not that. It's actually this other thing. When that's what he's saying the church is doing as well. So I'm a little bit confused. Like, what is the answer you're looking for if science isn't a good enough answer for you and the church's answers aren't a good enough answer for you? And you say you're agnostic, but you also say you believe in God and Jesus. Is there ever an answer that would satisfy you, I guess is my question.
Well, I have the answers that I already have the answers. Well, for starters,
you do, and that's an interesting statement.
25 minutes in.
you have the answers, but again, I'm trying to get at, how did you get these answers, and how do you know that these answers are reliable? How do we test that they're reliable?
Well, the way that I got my answers was subjective, so there's not a way to replicate and test it like you would with a scientific method. But
so then we have to think about how reliable are subjective methods, right? Like if I had a subjective experience that contradicted your subjective experience, how would we decide who's correct if either of us is correct?
Well, you would, if it's subjective, you wouldn't be able to. That's like if I came to you with a handful of flowers. If I had a bouquet of flowers in my hand, okay, how would you tell? How could you know for sure, with absolute certainty, that I am holding flowers?
Well, you're not going to get to any absolute certainty with anything, and I don't believe that's going to happen. But what you can do is arrive at probabilities of a likely answer. And I would agree that you can't necessarily prove anything with just subjective evidence. You can use subjective evidence in conjunction with objective evidence, but you need to combine them together and still undergo the thought process of what does this mean? What does this information mean? How are we going to utilize this information, et cetera? And I understand you've brought up like this combination before, but that kind of begs the question, what do we like, how do we know that this combination of factors leads to your interpretation of it and your conclusion? Because I've read the same Bible as you. Like, I've looked into the Dead Sea Scrolls as well. I haven't had your subjective experience, but based on what I understand about the world, my interpretation is very different than yours. And so how do we meet?
What you just said, your interpretation of the world, right? How do you know that your interpretation of what's real is actually real? I mean, I'm not going to.
I don't.
Try to.
I don't.
Go trick.
And I don't. And that's why I can't rely on experience by itself. I can't rely on intuition by itself. You have to use a combination of different evidence, and you still have to think through what is the probability that these things are accurate. Right. Well, and I think you're looking too hard for a 100% answer. We're not going to get there, but we can get to probability.
Well, and I would actually argue that the example of the flowers may not be a very good example because you have a tangible thing. You have a tangible item in your hands and you're saying these are flowers, and we know how flowers grow. We know where they come from. We know what kind they are. We know what makes them healthy. We know what makes them sick. We know how they get to the florist. We know how all of this works. I've never had anybody come up to me with God and say, this is God. This is a tangible thing. This is Jesus. This is a tangible thing. This is me trying to prove to you that this is real. And I think that right there is why we have so many of these debates and these conversations, because nobody in the history of the world, unless we're talking about the Bible, which we've already agreed was secondhand kind of hearsay written by men. Nobody has ever come up to any other human being and said, this that I have in my hands right here is God, and it's actually God, and now I want to know whether or not you believe in God. If somebody comes up to me with flowers, I say, those are flowers. How do I know? Because I'm touching and I'm feeling the flowers. We can call them whatever we want, but they'll still be flowers. At the end of the day, they still grew the same way. They were still came about the same way.
That wasn't the only point that I had with the flower example. What I meant by the flower example is that you cannot know for certain anything in reality. For all you know, you could be a brain in a jar. Everything.
Yeah, and that's a terrible argument because, yeah, ultimately you can't determine 100% certainty of anything. But I'm telling you, I do not care. I do not care about 100% certainty. I care about probability and real world applications, right? Like, I know when doctors say things, the assumption is that we know, like when we tell you a diagnosis, that's 100% what it is. That's not how this works at all. It is probability. It's like, it is most likely this thing. I'm going to treat it as if it's this thing because I have enough scientific data throughout the years and years of literature to say that this is pretty consistent with what we've seen in the past with this thing. And we have like demonstrable evidence that, you know, this treatment is probably the right one. So it's not, I'm not ever trying to reach 100% certainty. And so I think it's missing the point entirely to say, well, we could all be a brain in a vat, because yeah, we could, but that's not going to change this conversation.
Well, I mean, you just proved my point, though, because I can sit here and say that which I did.
No, I promise you that's not what happened.
And my knowledge, I use my senses and my knowledge and what I know to come up with my theory, with my answers. And so I have
Benji,
the best of my
your knowledge, and like, and here's the other thing too. Like, so we mentioned that there's some alternatives, correct, to things, but there's also the other category of the unknown unknowns, right? There's a whole set of variables that we don't even know. So to say that you've arrived at any kind of knowledge, of course, it is kind of overly confident, but with the idea of taking your experiences and what you think you know into an equation, I want to know from that point, how did you arrive at that knowledge? Like, how do you feel that you've obtained that knowledge?
Well, because I learned as I went, and also I don't understand the phrase "think you know," because you either know something or you don't. So you can't really think to know something. You either know it or you don't know it.
No, most things you think you know, because Benji, let's go with this, because you've mentioned that you're kind of not accepted a lot of science's explanations for certain things. Do you think you have knowledge on science, especially like neurobiology? Yeah. Do you think that you have sufficient knowledge of neurobiology to dismiss claims about it?
I know more science than most people do. I mean, I know how to...
That's not what I'm asking. Do you have sufficient knowledge to make claims about neurobiology? Like, do you have enough knowledge to tell a neurobiologist, hey, you are wrong about this thing, here's how I know?
It depends on what it is. I mean,
neurobiology.
I haven't.
Yeah, so you have. So what aspect of neurobiology do you have? Are you confident in your knowledge?
Brain neurology, basically.
Well, yeah, but what part of that?
The frontal lobe, the central cortex, the back, the left hemisphere.
So you know the parts of the brain. Okay, that's very minimal knowledge. Do you have more knowledge than that? Like, do you get what I'm asking when I say what part of neurobiology? Because like there are different topics within a subject. Like if I say medicine, if I say I understand a little bit about medicine, there's lots of things I have zero knowledge on. I guess I can't say zero because like I have like assisted in surgeries and stuff. I'm not a surgeon. I never will be a surgeon, so I can say that I have minimal knowledge in surgery, but I am not proficient in many of the topics there. But I can talk to you at great lengths about the kidneys. So when I say, do you have knowledge in a particular field, someone who is an expert in that might break that down and say, yeah, well, and even if you ask somebody like Forrest, you ask Forrest, like, do you have knowledge on science? He'd be like, which science are we talking about? What topic of science are we talking about?
Yes.
So do you have, like, within neurobiology, like, other than just being able to list out the parts of the brain, could you, like, let's say, like, brain chemistry, because especially brain chemistry related to near-death experiences, do you think you have sufficient knowledge there to have a discussion with a neurobiologist and tell them, hey, your interpretation of my near-death experience is incorrect?
When it comes to near-death experiences, a lot of them is subjective. It's different for every person.
But do you think you know what caused your near-death experience? Like, it sounds like you are relating things to religion. So you are effectively claiming that the neurobiologic etiology for this, being like brain chemistry, is to an extent incorrect. So do you have sufficient knowledge to say that it is incorrect?
So let me ask you this. If you die and you can see yourself, if you stand above yourself and you can see your body, and people have documented that hundreds of times, and did it...
That doesn't mean it's spiritual. That just means somebody had an experience, but people might have similar experiences with sleep paralysis.
Right, but
so if I'm more, yeah,
I think we're also misconstruing having knowledge and thinking we have knowledge, because let me tell you, spend 30 seconds on a dating app of any kind, and you will meet so many people who think and truly believe that they have a lot of knowledge on certain subjects. Be on the internet for 5 seconds, spend some time on Reddit. Everyone thinks they have a ton of knowledge on certain subjects. That doesn't mean they do, right? Like, Dr. Ben, you know things about medicine, but you can back it up with a history of working in medicine. You've done the studying, you've got the title, lots of people, you've got certificates and things that can back up what you know.
And I can cite my sources. That's a big thing. Experts are going to cite their sources for how they got their knowledge.
Right. There have been so many times in my life where I thought I knew a bunch about something, and then I learned I was wrong. But the whole time, I truly believed that I had a lot of knowledge in that area until I was proven wrong. So I think there's a big difference between actually knowing a lot about something and actually having a lot of proven, I don't want to say like certificated, but like awarded knowledge in a subject versus thinking you know a lot. And with respect to my friend Benji, I think that you truly believe you have a lot of knowledge in areas that you don't actually have that much true like studied peer-reviewed knowledge. It's a lot of feelings and personal experience that nobody else can really back up or peer review, and it's a lot of subjective things that lead you to believe sincerely that you have a lot of knowledge in these subjects, when maybe I think what we need to do is say there's a big difference between actually knowing what we're talking about and thinking we know what we're talking about.
Well, that's two different things, though. When I'm saying I have knowledge, right? So let's do this. Y'all's definition of knowledge is probably completely different than mine, just based on the past 30 seconds of what y'all have said. So,
but the problem is, even if our definition is different, we're using the term in the same way, which is problematic.
What? But I don't need extra stuff to prove that I have knowledge. Knowledge, by my definition, is when you know something. So,
but that's not a definition.
But again,
that's definition, and you're just asserting that you have knowledge,
and that you have definitions.
The problem is you're relying on your knowledge to make claims about the world, right? And we would agree that, like, the application of knowledge is the same. We are both using that term in the same way. You just have the word knowledge doing a lot of heavy lifting for you and not being willing to explain it. See, like if you have knowledge, you should be able to back up your knowledge. And if your knowledge is applicable to the particular situation, you should be able to logic your way through this and be able to make it logically coherent. Right? So it should be an accurate model if the knowledge that you have is correct.
I can sit here and tell you stuff, but it's subjective. You either believe me or you don't. So what would the point be of me explaining stuff to you?
That's also not subjective, right? Like if you say these are scientific facts based on evidence and I say I don't believe you, the science isn't the subjective part. That's not subjective. The facts and the evidence will never be subjective as long as they are facts and evidence that are proven by science or history or whatever, true information that can be peer reviewed and backed up through legitimate sources. That's not subjective. Just because I say, no, that doesn't work for me, I don't believe you, that doesn't make the science where it came from subjective.
Well, no, I'm saying I know something, right? I can tell you what I know. You can sit there and say, well, no, I just don't believe you. That's subjective. It's subjective in the sense that even if I tell you something that I know, you could say, well, I don't believe you. So therefore knowledge
because there's certain things that if you say that the sky is purple, like I could believe that your subjective experience is that, but I could also say, hey, you need to see an eye doctor because the rest of us don't see the sky as purple. So there's some disconnect. So even if you have knowledge, your knowledge can be incorrect. Right? Like, I guess I'll return the question. Do you believe that knowledge, that someone's knowledge could be incorrect?
No, because if they know something, they know something.
But that's not
okay. Okay. So then how? So if you're going to say that knowledge is something that is true, that somebody has awareness of and can communicate, how do we know that what you're saying is knowledge and not interpretation?
That's what the definition is of knowledge.
You can't just say it's true because I said it's true. That's what you're doing right now.
You can't make up definitions, man.
You still have, if something is going to move from subjective to objective, you have to have data to support it being objective. So if you're going to say this is knowledge, you have to back that up. How would you convince me that what you are saying is knowledge and not interpretation?
If I tell you that I know something, I don't have to back that up.
Yes, you do.
Yes, you do.
Benji,
you should want to.
I told you that I have full knowledge that, I don't know, penguins are mammals. Would I be wrong? Do I actually know that?
I'm afraid of this answer.
So yes, they are mammals. So that would be a fact. So you would know that.
Penguins are not mammals. What?
That would here, because when I say I have knowledge, I don't have to back that up. I mean, you might as well be saying if you go to school and the teacher tells you something, you should tell the teacher, well, you're wrong until you can prove it right.
That's what you should tell the teacher.
That's what you should do.
You should tell the teacher that. Yes. You should question everything until somebody can prove it with facts and evidence. Yes, absolutely.
And what the teacher might say, if it's grade school, your teacher might say, hey, yeah, actually, this thing is a bit more complicated than this, but we're learning it simply right now and you'll get the other information later. Because that's often what happens. Because we don't teach kindergartners the depths of like marine biology when we teach them that fish exist, right? Like there are degrees of learning along the way. But if something is incorrect, like a teacher should be willing to change what they're teaching in order to be correct. Like if I said that a fish is a mammal, I would be wrong, and I should not be teaching children that fish are mammals. So,
Well, fish. I mean, when I mean it, so I've actually did that. I've told my teacher stuff that was off subject, but still part of the curriculum, and they would say, "Well, that's years ahead," you know. But that's still knowledge, right? So if, let's say that the teacher says 2 + 2 is 4.
Right, but you got that knowledge from somewhere, Benji. You got that knowledge from somewhere, and that's what we're asking you: is where did you get your knowledge?
Well, I guess God. I mean,
Okay. And scene.
And see, yeah, I feel like we're gonna end there. Thanks for calling in, Benji.